right, well, welcome back. This is the third talk in a series about speech development. And the first one, as you remember, was about typical patterns of vocal development. The second one was about the impact of hearing loss and hearing technologies on vocal development, and how we have a much brighter future for developing speech in children who are deaf and hard of hearing today because of cochlear implants and newborn hearing screening. So as a clinician, you might be thinking to yourself, well, this is useful information, but is it just background information, or are there some practical applications? And so today we're going to talk about practical implications, ways to assess children at a very young age, and ways to provide intervention at the prelinguistic level. So let's get started. All right, in our research, we did speech sampling with these infants. And what we did was we recorded, video recorded children and their parents for 20 to 30 minutes. And then we classified whatever came out of the child's mouth. And that took about 2 hours to classify them as pre-canonical, basic canonical, or advanced forms. So it's a lot of work and a lot of computer power. And so it's not likely to be practical in most settings, with early intervention settings or school settings. So what I'm going to talk about first is a practical application called the conditioned assessment of speech production. So I developed this tool with Carol Stolgam at the University of Washington. And the CASP was designed to be an alternative to speech sample analysis. And it's easy to administer. It's an imitation game, and young children like to imitate. The stimuli that we ask the children to imitate are from the 3 developmental levels of the Stark assessment of early vocal development: the pre-canonical, the basic canonical syllables, and the advanced forms that you're familiar with. We've given it to children from 18 to 48 months who have hearing loss, and it's also been used in different languages, English, Spanish, and Korean to date. So the premise of the CASP is that we want to capture children's progress toward more speech-like sounds. We go from the pre-canonicals to the basic canonical syllables and the advanced forms, and we want to see children making those gains. So how do we give the CASP? Well, parents and clinicians work together, and they provide 10 utterances as models. They have isolated vowels from the pre-canonical level. Those would be e, and a. And then we have v syllables from the BCS level: ba, ma, wa, sa, and ka. And as you know, ba, ma, wa are very visible on the lips. So when giving the CASP, some children may be able to imitate those sounds or approximate them because they can see your lips. But sa and ka have no lip movements that are visible. And so if a child is able to imitate those 2 sounds and the remaining sounds on the CASP, then they're relying on their hearing. And finally, we have a CVC and a C plus diphthong syllable for the advanced form levels. Those syllables are nigh and tuck. All right, so those are the 3 levels of vocal development and the models that we've chosen as stimuli. So then the child's imitative attempts are reinforced with a classical stacker toy. And that's a Fisher-Price toy that is just a stacking ring, and it makes music and lights flash as children put the rings or the stars on the post. Now, in scoring the child's attempt to say these or to imitate each stimulus, we grade them as 0 if they don't attempt to imitate, or their imitation is not a close match. We call it partially acceptable if there's something about it that's similar to the model. And we grade it as a 2 if it's fully acceptable. Here's the score sheet for the CASP. We have 3 different items here. Here are the 3 low front vowels, a. That's item 3 on the CASP. You see 2 lines there because children, their imitative attempts are actually transcribed on those lines, and then a child can have a second chance if they're willing to imitate it again and their first response wasn't acceptable. So here are the criteria for 0 points, 1 point, 2 points. And these would be, for the example, if the child says or we say that's close enough because they're very similar vowels. This second example here is the syllable ka, and again, 2 trials are permitted. We transcribe, and then the child's responses are graded 0, 1, or 2 points. And here's the last item on the test, the CASP, the word tuck. And then we see this similar grading scale. So you're wondering how we do administer the CASP. So let's take a look at one of the first samples I gathered and videotaped. This is a 4-year-old girl who has normal hearing. Ready, Mia? Say ah, ah, ah.
Ah, ah, ah. Say ah, ah, ah. Ah, ah, ah.
Okay.
Oh, that's noisy.
And we'll give her credit for the best production whenever there's 2. All right, now we're going to level 2, consonants and vowels. Here's the first one. Ba.
Ba.
There you go.
Ba. Ba.
All right.
Oh, that's noisy.
Here's the next one. Ma.
Ma. Ma. Ma.
Here's the next one. Wa.
Wa. Wa. Wa.
Excellent. All right. How about ka?
Ka. Ka. Ka.
All right. Now you can spin it again. So as you can see, this little girl was very cooperative. She imitated everything, and it was more game-like. Her mom was involved so that we could have multiple levels of, multiple models of each utterance. I say it, she says it. It's very clear to the child what they are to imitate. All right. So we wanted to know whether the CASP could be as effective in evaluating vocal development as speech sampling. So we asked, do they have concurrent validity? And how close are CASP scores associated with the percentage of speech-like utterances in speech samples? So to do that, we had 19 children with cochlear implants. 2 of them had additional disabilities. They were implanted about 21 months of age, on average. And we collected CASP and speech samples at 6, 12, 18, and 24 months of cochlear implant use. And then 50 child utterances were analyzed from these speech samples. And we looked at correlational variables. So that was the percent of speech-like utterances, the BCS and the AF, in the speech samples, and the percent of CASP points earned at the same interval. And so here you see a scatter plot of the outcomes of this study. Here we have the speech sample BCS plus AF. So what percent of the child's sample at each interval belonged in that category as speech-like. And here we have the CASP percent scores. And then at each data point is where they intersect at each interval. So the black diamonds represent 6 months, the black circles 12 months, the open triangles represent 18 months, and the open squares were 24 months. And as you can see, we have a nice diagonal slope, which indicates that children's scores on the sampling and on the CASP increased with cochlear implant use. And as you can see up here in the corner, we have a very significant correlation. These 2 scores were significantly linked with each other. As CASP scores increased, so did sampling percentages of speech-like sounds. All right, so what about the means at each level, at each interval? So here we have 6 and 12 and 18 and 24 months. The black lines and black box is speech sample data, and the CAS scores are the open diamonds. And as you can see, at each interval, these means are very close to each other. In fact, they're nearly identical there at 24 months. And so what we can safely conclude is that the CAS can replace the time-consuming speech sampling that can be done to measure progress in vocal development. So here's some conclusion. The CAS has high concurrent validity with speech samples for English-speaking children. It's much more time efficient than sampling. Take us less than 10 minutes to do the CASP. It may identify children with secondary disabilities. As we noticed that the 2 children who had secondary disabilities in this study had mean scores that were more than a standard deviation, about a standard deviation and a half below the mean in CAS scores for their peers at 18 and 24 months. Adaptations of the advanced form level may be needed in the CASP for languages other than English. For example, Japanese and French and Finnish and Italian. And so the choice is yours. If you'd like, you could do speech sampling and analyze children's utterances and all the time-consuming tasks that are involved in that. Or you could relax and have a coffee and score the CASP in a time-efficient way. All right, so that was a tool that can be used for assessment by teachers of the deaf and clinicians, speech pathologists. But let's think about what we can do to help kids who are delayed in prelinguistic vocal development. So what kinds of intervention might be effective in helping kids make progress before they're saying words on a regular basis? And we've proposed an approach to intervention called short periods of prelinguistic input, or SPPI. And I've written about this in a number of publications, and they're cited in our references. But the goal of SPPI is to provide focused stimulation. You might be familiar with focused stimulation as a language stimulation technique where we say words kind of repeatedly in context to help children become more aware of them. So we use that technique for developmentally appropriate vocalizations to increase consonant and vowel diversity too. So our models are, we model for the child vocalizations from the child's current level and the next level of vocal development. For example, if the child's at the pre-canonical level, we try to introduce a variety of vowels so they learn how to say e's and ahs and oohs in isolation. If they're at the BCS level, we introduce a variety of consonants with different vowels and different syllable shapes and babbling. And if they're at the advanced form level, we start introducing and modeling CVC sounds and diphthongs and jargon. All right, so let's see. In doing SPPI, we try to provide these models every 5 seconds for about a minute. So 5 times per day. So parents would model, say, sa, 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 and leave time in between the models so that the child has a chance to imitate. And I have examples of SPPI on the Vocal Development webpage. Vocaldevelopment.com is a website parents can go to, as well as teachers of the deaf and clinicians, so you can learn more about vocal development and also some interventions. So I'll let you go to the Vocal Development website and take a look, but let's play this link so you can see a mother providing SPPI without even realizing that's what she's doing.
Mum, 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 mum. Mama.
Mama.
Mama. Mama, mama. Mama, mama.
All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that clip as much as I did. It was fascinating to me to see the mom modeling for the child and waiting, and sure enough, he responds with a ma, ma, ma. I think she might have chosen ma, ma, just so the child might say her name before he says da, da, for example. Who knows? But then it was interesting also on another level that later on the child started to say da, 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 and the mom switched her models to match him. So that was a powerful way to let him know that she's listening to what he has to say. All right, so in getting started with SPPI, and this is certainly something that teachers of the deaf or clinicians can do, and parents can do throughout the day, the important thing is to advise parents on the special targets to choose. I think we've talked about if the child is mainly at the PC level, we want them to try different vowels. If they're at the BCS level, 20% of what they say is BCS, then we want them to start with labial consonants like B's and P's and M's and W's so they can see and hear, and then introduce less visible consonants, newer consonants. And then move on to the advanced form levels and those different syllable shapes you see right there. So it would be useful to sit down with parents and show them these video examples, explain how speech-like targets help children learn how to produce words, encourage parents to try SPPI several times a day, and then as you meet with parents, to discuss changes in the child's vocalization. So you're always helping them and encouraging them to be aware of what's going on with the child's development. And here are some references and related readings about assessment and intervention for young kids who have cochlear implants or hearing aids. So thanks again for your attention. And in our next lecture, we'll be moving on to phonological development, the development of meaningful speech.